I've said it, and it sounds cliche, but it's just kind of the culmination of spring for us. I just wanted to see some guys have a chance to play in front of the fans. What an awesome fan base we have for that many people to show up early in the spring like this and watch, and the environment. It's great being back around them, and I just want to get off the field healthy, and I think we did that too. So we've seen 14 practices, guys doing what they need to do, and the schemes that we're running today was just kind of about showcasing some of that to the fans and finishing spring ball the right way.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast with Dave, Honky, Boomer, and Redcast Rob.
Welcome to the Go Big Redcast. I'm your host, Honky, and I'm with Redcast Rob.
Hey, everybody. I put this out on Twitter earlier, but I just wanted you to know that after this weekend and attending the spring game, getting such a wonderful tour from Tyler Kai, the associate AD, and spending some time with some former players over at an after party from the spring game, I am agreeing to fully commit to the Husker program beginning this fall. I'm super excited. And I'm sure that our guest tonight has all of my high school stats from 1988 through 1992 on him right now.
I'm guessing that's not the case, Rob, and I don't think the Huskers are offering. But you are correct on a great weekend we had here, and we have a wonderful guest, and we're going to get to him in a second. Before we do, a couple of our early promos here. One of them is where our guest is from, Hail Varsity. You can go to hailvarsity.com/subscribe, use the promo code REDCAST, and you can get $10 off subscription there. Next, you might have seen something that we've teased here the last couple of days, a fan forum, and you'll see how we spell four with the 4 question marks. We're going to start up a new spinoff with the Redcast that's going to be premiering in the near future. The premise is simple. It's not even really that unique. I or any one of the Redcasters are going to sit down and do one-on-one interviews with a Husker fan, ask them the same 4 questions, and it could be a former player, coach, famous celebrity fan, or just your next door neighbor. So you might be on the Redcast at some point doing a fan forum. And last but not least, Smack and Smooch, great sponsors here of the Redcast. They are making a lot of the shirts and all the shirts and the koozies and everything that we've been wearing here and sporting the last couple of weeks, custom shirts and specialty items. Shane and Laura, give them a call, 308-325-2542. So with that said, our guest here tonight, we welcome for the first time to the Redcast, Greg Smith, recruiting analyst over at Hail Varsity. Greg writes a daily recruiting notebook column and hosts a weekly Hail Varsity podcast on the Hurrdat Media Network called Straight Up Breakdown, where he gives an honest breakdown of what's happening in the world of sports. You can follow Greg on Twitter at GregSmithHV. Welcome to the Redcast.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. And I just have to say off the top, Rob, I'm sure your high school stats were amazing. And I'm sure all of the fans would be very happy to have you as a potential 5-star.
Well, they'd be non-existent, and but the 5-star part is right.
Okay, see, told you.
Well, Greg, like we like to do every week, I'm going to start off with a tweets of the week. And this one, we have a couple to do with the last week. And this one is, I want to first just ask you about this one. This is really cool. Something I saw from Nebraska Business and read the article there. And it just talked about your journey coming into Hail Varsity and doing what you're doing. I just think it's a really neat one. So if you would, just give us a couple, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the kind words. So essentially, it was a really cool honor to have the college that I graduated from, the College of Business, kind of feature me in an alumni feature that they had going, just kind of talking to me about kind of my career and how I ended up in this spot. As I did not go to school. Obviously, if I graduated from the College of Business, I did not go to school for journalism or broadcasting or anything like that. I was a marketing major through college and just kind of found my way into sports just by liking it and kind of talking to people on social media and then getting into blogs and whatnot. And so it's been a weird career and journey to get to this point. I've been doing it for years now, but was not the initial intended path. And I think the purpose of that article was just to show students that you sometimes fall into things that you didn't necessarily go to school for, and that's okay. It's perfectly fine. It happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, there was a great quote in it you had where you said, it's important to talk to college prospects about more than football. It can be helpful for them to understand that playing football is just one part of their direction. The academic piece is worth looking into it as well. I mean, that is something we forget sometimes, especially with NIL and all the things going on. These are still student athletes. They're still getting an education. And for the most part, most kids aren't going to go on to do professional sports. So whatever that, the education is so important to all of us, because that's the thing that's going to open the doors, for whatever that we do in our lives and our careers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that it gets kids talking about something other than football, right? I think that it's a good way to remember that these are well-rounded kids that have other interests as well. Like, we like to talk about the football part, of course, right? And that's what we're here for. But there are a lot of other things going on as well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the football part. And Redcasters watching live here on our Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, especially Facebook and YouTube. Apparently, Twitter, you can't send us questions directly through this program that we have. So keep watching if you're watching on Twitter. But on the other two, send in your questions, especially your recruiting questions here, because that's what we're going to get into. And what we just did this last week in spring game, 55,000 people show up. It's funny, only in Nebraska will some people complain what 55,000 means. I mean, come on. When we talked to Tyler Kai last Friday, he was giving us that tour that Rob talked about. And, he's worked at Tennessee and, a big SEC school, 100,000 plus seat stadium. And he was like, it was 20 to 30,000 people would maybe show up at a spring game there. He worked at Tulane. He said it was just pretty much parents showed up. I've seen some spring games at other Big Ten schools. I mean, 55,000. I mean, Greg, put that into perspective, I guess, for the Redcasters listening. What does that look like to a recruit when they walk into that stadium?
Oh, it's a huge deal to recruits, and almost to the point to where they all mention it. And I sometimes wonder, like, did they all get together and talk about this? Like, how does this consistently come up from every recruit? But it really does. And when you talk to kids that especially have been to, like you mentioned, some of those other places around the country and seen kind of what those spring games are like, or even what actual game days are like, and then they come to Nebraska, you'd be amazed at the amount of people that say, man, I went to, school X down south and it wasn't sold out for their actual game. And I went to, Nebraska spring game and they had 55,000 people out there, for a scrimmage. I think it has a really big impact. And I think that sometimes it's easy to take for granted, like the fan support that is here in place at Nebraska, because you just kind of grew up with it, right? Like it was just always like this. But so you take a step back and realize that not only do schools not have, that type of fan support for spring games, it's also in season as well. So I think it's always a big impact to recruits to be able to see that.
Well, some of those recruits here, and I just grabbed these tweets here from last week. There was more than just this, but this was some of the 2023s that were there. And maybe we'll start with that. Let's go just kind of give an overview. I know we're not going to have time to go through every single kid, but Greg, it was a big recruiting weekend for the staff. Was it mainly 2023? Was it 2024 and 25? Was it transfer portal or kind of a combination of all of that?
It was a combination of everything, but I was a little surprised at how focused it was on the 2023 class. It's the current class that we're in, so that sounds weird to say. But typically what ends up happening at these spring games is that you already have a lot of the board set for Nebraska, and so they're bringing in guys for like the second and third time that are in the current class, and then they're really focusing on those future classes to be able to get guys exposure to the Nebraska fan base, and then also to campus and to the city, because as much as people hate to hear it, and I can hear the moans and groans now, kids consistently say, I thought the Nebraska was just cornfields, or actually Trey, the four-star defensive lineman, Trey Wilson, actually, I did a video with him the other day. He legitimately said, I thought that it was going to be like a couple miles in between houses when I got to Lincoln. Like, it happens. Like, that is just the stereotype of what it's like in Lincoln. So anytime that you can combat that as Nebraska and get these kids on campus, whether it's in the current class or in future classes, so that you can continue to then bring them back, is a good thing. But no, overall it was pretty balanced, maybe even a little bit more leaning towards future classes, but there was a lot of star power in that 2023 group, like you put up on the screen. There were a lot of different 4-stars. I think Nebraska had as many 4-stars visiting this past weekend for the class of 23 than they had the entire season for 2022, like during the regular season. And so it was a really big deal for what they were able able to do. And I think a lot of that is due in part to, one, they needed to reset the board, right? When you have four new assistant coaches that are coming in on the offensive side of the ball, and then you have Bill Busch transitioning into a full-time role, there's going to be a whole lot of new ideas and new prospects that these coaches want to get on campus. And I think that was reflected in kind of where these guys came from as well. As you saw Georgia represented, Florida, of course, Missouri was also represented. There was a little bit of a shift towards Texas and Illinois as well. There were prospects from all over the country.
As I continue on here, I'm going to look at, let's see here. What was the next one that we had? Well, this is a photo here of Ochaun, and a photo you took there of him. He was obviously one of the big time recruits that we had there, and he's a transfer portal one. So he is an immediate player, 2022, if we can get him here. And, as you look here, Trev Alberts is talking with him. I mean, they really put on the full court press with him. How important is he to this, and who were some of the real big name ones that were in on the weekend?
Yeah, so Ochaun is who I probably should have started with in all of this. We get so many questions on this. I put out a call for recruiting questions earlier today, and every single question was about Ochaun Mathis. And it was reflected in what we saw on Saturday. Like, I'm not sure I've ever seen like so much attention be paid to one recruit, whether it was, the fact that he had basically his own personal attendant from Nebraska staff out there with him and his family at midfield the whole time during pregame. You saw a number of coaches and players come up to him. You saw the picture with Trev Alberts coming to speak to him. Jason Peter came and talked to him. Like, there was just never a time where he was really alone, and it seemed that he was really enjoying things. You saw the pictures on social media. I know everybody saw Scott Frost in that photo. To my knowledge, that was the first time that Scott Frost has appeared in one of those photos. Like, that never happens. Like, I was kind of stunned, but that also goes to show you just how important he was to the weekend. The other recruit, though, that got almost as much attention was, of course, Dylan Raiola, the 2024 five-star quarterback, who at one point I looked over and someone was handing him a baby to take a picture with. Like, things get weird in recruiting, right? Like, it just kind of goes a little sideways, but it's all fun. He was definitely a big deal. It's always huge to get him on campus, considering he could be the number one overall prospect in the 2024 class. Forget the number one quarterback. He could be the top player in the entire country for that class. So to continue to get him back on Nebraska's campus is a huge deal. We know about the family ties with his uncle Donovan coaching the offensive line now. Dominic, his father, was back in town as well and down there on the field taking in the scene as well. Those were probably the two big ones. But there was another one I want to highlight just because I stood next to him and he was so huge. Bo Hughley, who is a four-star Georgia guy. Yeah, he's a four-star offensive lineman from Georgia. He's actually committed to Georgia right now. And I'm walking down the sideline taking those pictures that you just put up, as I always do every week. And I literally look up and I see this kid, and he's just a mountain. I want to say a man, but he's not. He's like 16 years old. And he's just huge. Like, when you see kids that are like these big time offensive linemen, like, that's exactly what he looked like out of central casting for that. He was on campus. There was a kid that is a 3-star Louisville commit, Adanja Green, who is also from Georgia. He's a Louisville commit right now. He definitely looked the part as well down there. Joshua Manning, the 4-star wide receiver out of Lee Summit, Missouri, was also back on campus for, I believe, the 4th time. He's a really high value target for Nebraska, and Mickey Joseph is working hard to get him. But there were just a number of guys that were here. Kyan Lee, a 4-star defensive back, also from Georgia, surprise, who was a former Georgia commit. He was on campus this weekend as well. Nebraska did a really nice job of getting all these guys here and really getting to show them what the spring game can be as a showcase, to then get them excited to come back either for official visits over the summer or get them back for an actual game day in the fall.
And a number of these guys, you've had video conversations with them. You can find them on YouTube, right, at the Hail Varsity site. You had a great slideshow of all the photos that on the article I read there on hailvarsity.com as well. What a full weekend. And really, it was across the board with the number of players there. It was quarterbacks and linemen and both sides of the ball, and just every position group being affected in one way or another. Here is what the recruiting class right now currently still sits at. We're at 5 players. And Redcasters, you're familiar with this screen here. And I actually need to update this because I was talking with Greg right beforehand. For 2023, the in-state recruiting, we now have a 6th in-state recruit that was offered. Brock Knudsen from Scottsbluff was at the spring game, and he was offered, correct?
Yes, that is correct. He was offered at the spring game right before he went out to Kansas City for the Under Armour camp. Excuse me. I don't know if you saw, there were some clips floating around on Twitter of him actually pancaking a kid in a drill. So it's good to get the offer from the in-state school and then go out and pancake some kids the next day out in Kansas City.
Well, I love it. And I really appreciate a Scotts Bluff kid. I mean, we obviously Garrett Nelson is from out there, but I love the fact that it really spans the length of the state, that you got to recruit the inner borders of this state as well as any other state in the country. And that means that we're offering kids from Omaha to Scotts Bluff and in between. How about the one big one here, the 4-star that isn't committed yet here, but has the offer, Malachi Coleman? Where was he at this last weekend, and where do you think he's standing?
So I believe he was in Oregon. He was either in Oregon this past weekend or he was just there, but he was not at the spring game. But he was on campus a couple of times during the spring, so it's not as if he hadn't been back to Lincoln here recently. But the latest on his recruitment is it continues to take off. I think over this last month, Oregon, Washington, Iowa, and I believe Texas Tech have all offered him within the last 30 days. He continues to take off, and it's for a couple of different reasons. One, he's a great kid. Like, if you ever get a chance to talk to him, read an interview with him, or see him on video, like, he is just a great kid, first and foremost. And so I think that really attracts colleges to him. But he's also a super player and a great athlete, right? And you can see that by the fact that colleges project him to play so many different positions. Like, Nebraska is recruiting him as a wide receiver. There are some that like him at tight end, or some that like him at defensive end, some that like him at outside linebacker. I joke with him that maybe somebody wants him as a kicker or a punter as well. Might be a waste of his talent, so that vertical wouldn't play as well as a punter. But he's a multi-talented kid that is really still continuing to take off, and it's been a really neat story because it was really kind of a nice local story here last year. During his junior year, when you started to see him get more offers, Nebraska was one of the first schools, and then Kansas State came in, Minnesota. And then he kind of hit the camp circuit, right? And that's when Georgia kind of jumped in and Oregon jumped in, and you saw some of these other like really big programs come after him. But that's great for him. It's also great exposure for kids here in Lincoln, because when some of those coaches start to show up in the fall, there's a trickle-down effect there, because they get to see teammates, they get to see his opponents as well. So that's great for everybody.
Rob, how are we looking right now on some questions or comments?
Well, the only comments that I have is it's Ken. He's a big fan of the show. First he said, wow, first we got to tailgate with them on Saturday, and now we have Greg Smith on, so we're big time. And then he asked a question, and he wants to know, what percentage would you put Nebraska's chances are at for getting Mathis? So not to talk about Mathis too much here, but apparently that's what our fans want to know. So
I was prepared for that. I feel like that is, I'm telling you, that is the thing that people want to know right now. Ochaun Mathis, the Ochaun Mathis watch is on. I would say, if I had to put a percentage on it, and don't hold me to this, I would say 40% right now, and that's probably trending up after this past weekend, because it's just going to be hard to not be impressed by the full court press that Nebraska put on him and his family over the weekend, right? Like, with the amount of attention that they got from Nebraska staff, and I know that they try to demonstrate clearly that there is a need for him, and he plays a position of need. It is something that has eluded Nebraska now for years. You mentioned Garrett Nelson before. He's developed into a really nice player. They could use more guys like that get after the quarterback. The more of those you have, the better. But I will put it at 40, pending some changes, depending on where else he visits. We'll have to see kind of what goes with that. But he did announce earlier today on Twitter that Mathis wants to make an announcement and a decision by the end of this month. I think that'll kind of coincide with TCU's graduation, because that's why he hasn't transferred somewhere already, is he's waiting to graduate from TCU, and then he'll be off to his next school, before fall camp begins.
I was actually gonna say, yeah, that makes sense, because graduation's end of April, beginning of May for most colleges. So it would make sense that he does that too, just because I'm sure that they're still paying his way over there at TCU. So
right.
Doesn't want to upset too many people. He's still got to go and look people in the eye every day, right? But
right.
I mean,
now